So today I thought I'd record something just sharing from personal experience, as that's always the most uh, relatable, resonateful, a word I've used on this channel before. And that's on the topic of grief, love, and loss. And what I wanted to explore was the experience of loss, because it's a theme that's been coming up for me recently. But it's very interesting. It's been some emotional releases, and the emotional releases nowadays are so beyond a story, which is quite. I mean, it's been like that for a while, but it just becomes even more and more the case, I suppose, as we go deeper down the awakening path, that the shadow work, this emotional kind of trauma blockages that have been stored in the nervous system, in the body, and then they get released through opening up techniques, whether that's self-inquiry, meditation, psychedelics. For me, it's been a combination of a bunch. And to be honest, the work around humanness has been very important for me, right? I've done a lot of work in the spiritual practices sphere. I've focused on that for a long time, going deep within, doing silent retreats, spending lots of time on my own. And it's all just a perfect balance, right? But the theme recently has been a lot around kind of exploring relationship with others, exploring intimacy, which has been incredible. And it has opened me up a lot. And it made me realize how much, or even not even realize, it just brought things up and out, right? And it's so I mean, that's an aspect of this that's maybe sometimes not realized if we're looking at things from the awakening non-duality perspective. The importance of, my friend Maggie, we've had a couple of conversations, and she says it really nicely before, like, life is always the best teacher, right? Every experience is there to open you up, is there to, there's the circumstances, the conditions of each moment are so intelligently kind of happening for you to feel something, for something to open up. So, I mean, for me, there's been, lots happening around people and love and that kind of stuff. And then, realizing what came out through that. And a lot of it was this feeling of deep letting go. But you can't force this stuff, right? This is what's really important. So people often ask about, because I can just see the questions happening if I'm talking about deep emotions like grief and loss. And then the mind is going to interpret this and say, how do I make myself feel that, right? How do I make myself experience these deep emotions? Because often we can feel that feeling of emotional disconnect. I hear it a lot through people going through whatever they're going through that watch some of these videos. And you can't force the emotions out. They will come through the intelligence of your life circumstances, right? You have to just be open to being vulnerable and putting yourself in situations that you maybe are afraid of, right? So that's what the past year and a half or so has been for me all about, has been kind of exploring depth in the human realm, and then seeing how that ties into some of the realizations I had around awakening and non-duality. And life just will open you up. Mac Garrett has said it before, it's like it's just a continuous cracking open. I think he said, like, enlightenment is a gentle cracking open, but I would say it's like a continuous cracking open through a willingness to be vulnerable and really, it's funny, it's hard to talk about because it really does feel like nowadays that things just happen so, like they couldn't happen any other way. I mean, and it is very true. So it's difficult to say how to make this happen, but one thing I can say, if I feel into the times that led up to these kind of emotional breakthroughs and releases, was vulnerability. A willingness to allow ourselves to be seen. And we'll find the people that will help us to do this, right? This is what I found. It's been incredible that the right people came into my life at the right time to kind of open things up in me that I wouldn't have opened up on my own. And and then it was seeing all the dynamics still playing out in the mind, right? Kind of this fear of this part of myself to be seen, or, interpretations around how one should present or one should express. It always comes back to that fucking word of should. Of what should I say in this situation? How does one express feeling in this situation, right? And for me, what really opened me up more and more was just trusting my heart always. And it's not going to go where you think it's going to go. It never does, right? Expectations are just not the way, but it will go exactly where it needs to, right? So that's what I can say. For example, it was just really kind of feeling when there was a deep fear of saying something. This is how it's been for all of my relationships recently, like family relationships, close relationship, friend relationship, romantic relationship, whatever. It's been this kind of vulnerable opening up to the things that feel part of me knows it wants to be said, but then there's all a million reasons in the mind why it shouldn't be said. And I feel like we get clarity on this as the path deepens, right? So, if that's not clear for you yet, it's okay. It kind of happens later, but just keep going deep. And and then when these experiences, these deep emotional releases come out, like deep grief, which has been the theme for me, it's incredible because it's not about a story. It's just what it is about. Well, I mean, we could say it is about a story. It's about the death of a story. It's what it feels like to me. It's about the loss of an illusion, right? That's what it felt like. It was like when the circumstances lined up for me to feel these emotions, it felt like a world in the mind was dissolving, but it was even an unconscious world, right? It was not even a story that I was clinging to, but it was like something dropped, something unexpected happens, whatever. You open yourself up, and then life will give you the responses you need to kind of help you drop the stories. And what you'll see behind this is that the reason there was the need for stories in the first place was because we were terrified of the feeling of deep grief. But then when we're willing to be vulnerable and open and express what it is we're feeling, it doesn't mean that you're going to get what you want, but it does mean that you're going to see what was underneath that, if that makes sense. Like for me, it was like sharing something around how I felt, and then an emotional release just out of nowhere, and then seeing that there had been a certain story maybe operating in the background that now released because that deep loss, that grief had now been felt. And in the past, that deep loss and that grief, we would have to have had stories on top of it to keep it compressed, if that makes sense. So it's like we would be seeking all these things in our life so that we don't feel this kind of really empty feeling of loss. But it's very raw, it's very visceral, it's very alive, it's very human, and it feels incredible at the root, but it's intense. And I can see why we would use everything we can to run from it. We would create all these stories, all these futures to run into. And this is what happens, right? As our kind of, we come more and more into presence, which the mind often is like, oh, I'm present, but true presence is radical, because this is what starts to happen, right? Is all these mental illusions of a future fall away, and then you feel this loss of light, and it's way more intense than your mind can imagine. But it's okay, right? This is what's, maybe this can sound a little bit intense, maybe it can sound a little bit off-putting, but it feels very right. But it doesn't mean that it's not intense, right? So, just know that, and just trust. For me, that's what it always comes down to, is trust. And the trust becomes automatic eventually, because you realize you're just not in control, and it just gets very mysterious. But yeah, I mean, we will all experience these kind of deep emotions, and it's just how willing we are to open up in whatever way we can, right? So there's no magic formula, but there are moments that life will present to you where you have the feeling of, I can open up here, and then who knows what happens on the other side. Because we'll run away from that because we're afraid of the unknown, right? But when we live in the unknown, we're not going to live in it perfectly all the time, but we can touch into it whenever it presents itself, and that's how things open up and release. So that's just a little sharing from me. I'm currently in this cute little cabin in northern Holland. Yeah, it's been fun. Alrighty.